Should America, should any state, should any community look at the world through the lens of race? And what happens when we do? Well, the perfect guy to talk to about that is our friend Mike Gonzalez, senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation and the author of The Plot to Change America, How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. Mike, I was just sharing with my audience that there are literally programs that have been set up during this pandemic this last year that say you don't qualify unless you have the right skin color. Something I thought went out with all of the debates over, drinking fountains and seats at the diner and seats on board buses, that we had all agreed you can't have race-based thinking when it comes to deciding how the government treats its various citizens. Or can we?
Well, Lars, hi. How are you? First of all, let me thank you for
welcome back, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Look, you said a whole bunch of things. Let me try to address a couple of them. You're absolutely right that what is being tried here, and I think Americans, your listeners, but all Americans should have to have their eyes very open to this, is a return to the Plessy era, a return to the Plessy versus Ferguson era, introduced in the late 1890s, late 1880s, early 1890s, that says, yes, we can have separate but equal. No, we cannot. To treat the races differently was evil then. It produced 100 years, almost 100 years of Jim Crow, which was evil, and we should have moved away. Unfortunately, with the civil rights movement, which was what was necessary to move away from Jim Crow, right away we jumped into another kind of race consciousness, another kind of color consciousness. And now, to refer to what is happening under COVID, is that you're absolutely right. The leaders of the Marxist organization, the Black Lives Matter organization, which are Marxists, and not the concept. I have to say this every time. You have to be deranged not to agree with the concept of Black Lives Matter. But the organizations are led by Marxist women, Marxist-Leninist women. They are very open about the fact that they want to use the pandemic to change the country. This is their opportunity to have a reset. So, yes, they're going to – this is a conflation of two things, the instability, the protests, the violence, and the riots that we had this year, together with the pandemic, to really rush into a transformation of America. You're absolutely right.
Well, and I'm very concerned about this. In fact, let me bring up a couple of specific issues. One, the BLM cry to defund the police, to empty the prisons, to say, let's no longer have people prosecuted for crimes, and if they already have been, release them from prison. I'm not going to argue that America hasn't had injustices of one kind or another, usually involving a very small number of people. But if you say, no, at this point, we don't want people arrested anymore, and especially if they make the case that says black people are, and black males in particular, are arrested at a far higher percentage than they represent in the general population. You say, but if we're applying the law, and if somebody breaks the law, do we say if we get past a certain percentage of arrests of one demographic or another that we have to just stop arresting people? Because that doesn't make any sense. And I would argue that the biggest victims of that kind of policy would be black Americans themselves, who are too often usually the victims of those criminals.
But you're absolutely right. It's impoverished communities that would suffer the most. When the rich are always going to be okay, Lars. The rich are always going to be able to buy their own security. It's the impoverished communities that are going to suffer the most. Now, you can make the case, and Heritage has made this case for years, that we're over-criminalized, right? That lobstermen in Maine, lobster fishermen in Maine are being put in prison for netting lobsters that are 2 centimeters too long or too short.
And I agree with you there. But Mike, if we're primarily talking about people being sent to prison, those are the kinds of things I'd love to see stripped off the law books. But if we're talking about the conventional crimes that have been crimes since the Ten Commandments, you can't murder people. You can't go out and beat on people. You can't steal from people. Those are the crimes that put most of the people behind bars, aren't they?
No, I was just setting the stage for that.
Sorry about that, Mike.
Is that yes, we do have, and Heritage has led with this. Attorney General Ed Meese has been one of the leading lights, Reagan's Attorney General, in saying we're over-criminalized. But that is not what is at stake here. And by the way, I think you and I both agree that an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old or a 17-year-old who gets caught for smoking a joint or having some marijuana should not receive a life sentence in the sense that he goes to the slammer for a few months, but then nobody's going to hire him. Nobody's going to hire him for life.
And I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, no, we have to fix all that, right? But that is not what is at stake here. You're absolutely right in going back to crimes that have been crimes since the Bible. Crimes against our right, our right to life, our right to property. Those crimes, people have to serve time. But by the way, let me just go back to this because I'm writing a lot about this. Black Lives Matter, defunding the police and dismantling the police department, as bad as that is, and that is awful. They're much worse than that because they're asking to smash capitalism. They want to transform all aspects of society, all our institutions, our structures, in our systems. They want to change them. So it's not just the police. You and I can have another argument about public sector unions, about police unions, and teachers unions. That's not what they want to have. They want a complete wholesale transformation.
Yeah, and if they do that, again, who suffers the most? And then let me bring up the vaccine, because we're right on the cusp of seeing a vaccine approved. And if a vaccine is approved, I'm hearing people say, well, let's give it to the people who need it the most. And you say, okay, let's talk about old people in nursing homes. Let's talk about older Americans, period, whether they're in nursing homes or not, the staff who work there, the staff who work at hospitals and clinics and doctors' offices. And I'm not for forcing it on anybody. But what I'm hearing as well is an undertone of let's play the race card and say there are historically disadvantaged communities, and they ought to get it first. In other words, America, and I'm speaking of one state in particular, but there are states out there saying, let's make sure that we start to hand it out on the basis of race as well, which I don't think makes any sense, and it doesn't sound constitutional.
Right. No, it would be unconstitutional. And the principle with these things should always be, let's try to save the most lives possible with the limited resources that we have. That is let's try to human lives, right? All of us have a common humanity. Let's try to save as many lives as possible. And by the way, this thing with COVID is very interesting, right? Because all the categories they created, for example, the Hispanic category or the Asian American category they created back in the 70s, now they're coming up with COVID. They say, well, they're not real because Hispanics come from all different races and have all different cultures. And since what affects the health is either your DNA or your culture, where you eat, your habit, or where you've inherited, Hispanics doesn't help at all. To say that you're Hispanic means absolutely
it's an
zero.
Ethnicity, right?
It's right. It's a made-up category, made up by OMB, by the Office of Management and Budget. Yeah, they call it ethnicity. Asian Americans, Americans with backgrounds in India, backgrounds in Japan, backgrounds in Thailand, Vietnam, and these Americans have very different cultural indicators. Again, different inherited traits, different inherited adversities, adversity to a disease in different cultures. That's all that affects your health. So the chickens are really going to come home to roost for these created categories because they're not going to be helpful at all in administering a vaccine.
No, they're not. Mike Gonzalez at Heritage, the author of The Plot to Change America, How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. Mike, thanks so much. I appreciate the time.